Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is July 22nd, 2024. Tuesday. No, I'm sorry, Monday, July 22nd, 2024. I'm getting ahead of myself. It happens every once in a while. But anyway, let's get off to our first story. Our first story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories and is titled An Honest Obituary. Many people like to think that as people head towards death, especially if they can foresee it, either through illness or age, they try to make amends or at least heal the wounds of those they hurt. But that is not always the case. Old age is no guarantee of repentance or of regret, and it's a harsh reality for those who have been emotionally run over by an individual waiting for the moment where they are offered an apology or at least an understanding of the hurt they have caused. Even if their plea for forgiveness is not accepted, they make an attempt, but in truth there are people who have no remorse and they are as unrepentant in old age as they were in their youth. Such is the story of Larry Pfaff Jr., a Jacksonville resident whose father recently passed away at the age of 81. The obituary he wrote for Pfaff Sr. resonated with many who understand that healing from abuse, emotional and or physical, only starts by calling out an abuser who should have protected you from the moment of your birth. Then the newspaper tried to backtrack on July 5, 2022 by printing the following, quote, "We regrettably published an obituary that did not adhere to our guidelines, and we're looking into the matter further. We regret any distress this may have caused," end quote. It seems that writing the brutally honest obituary provided Larry Pfaff Jr. was something his father never did, a catharsis. This is the content the publishers apologized for, even though it appears to be well-deserved. Quote, Lawrence H. Pfaff Sr. was born in Belmont, New York on April 16, 1941. He passed away on June 27, 2022, living a long life, much longer than he deserved. He is survived by his 3 children, no 4, 5 children. Well, as of 2022, we believe there is one more that we know about, but there could be more. His love was abundant when it came to himself, but for his children it was limited. From a young age he was a ladies' man and an abusive alcoholic, solidifying his commitment to both with the path of destruction he left behind, damaging his adult children and leaving them broken. Lawrence Sr.'s hobbies included abusing his first wife and children. He loved to start projects but never followed through on any of them. He enjoyed the life of a barfly for many years and had a quaint little living space studio above his favorite hole in the wall, the Club Nashville. Lawrence Sr. did spend over 20 years in the NYPD, but even his time in service was negligent at best. Because of his alcohol addiction, his commanding officer took away his gun and badge, replacing them with a broom until he could get his act together. Lawrence Sr. did claim to be clean and sober for over 30 years, but never worked any of the 12 steps, including the 8th and 9th steps with his children, making amends. He possesses no redeeming qualities for his children, including the ones he knew and the ones he knew about. Wow, let's keep going on this. It will be challenging to miss Lawrence Sr. because he was narcissistic. He was incapable of love. Lawrence Sr.'s passing proves that evil does eventually die, and it marks a time of healing, which will allow his children to get the closure they deserve. Lawrence Sr. can be remembered for being a father to many and a dad to none, end quote. Larry Pfaff Jr. is not the only one who announces to the world through an obituary that their parents were horrible persons. In 2018, Jay Demlow said he and his sister Gina wrote the following about their mother, Kathleen Demlow. Quote, "She passed away on May 31st, 2018 in Springfield and will now face judgment. She will not be missed by her children, Gina and Jay, and they understand that this world is a better place without her," end quote. Their mother abandoned them in 1962 when she became pregnant by her brother-in-law and moved to California. His maternal grandparents, Joseph and Gertrude Shunk, brought them up. They didn't find out about their 2 half-brothers until years later. She visited them twice through the years, but wouldn't even acknowledge their existence, and showed pictures to family members of herself with her other children. Kathleen married her first husband, Dennis Demlow, and then Lyle Demlow in 1973. In an act of censorship, the revenge obituary was taken down from the Redwood Falls Gazette in Minnesota and Legacy.com. The outcome of an obituary can also lead to unexpected results. In 2018, a man who had been on the run for 40 years after he broke out of an Oklahoma prison was nabbed using his mother's obituary. Stephen Michael Paris was brought through a reference in the obit referencing her son named Stephen Chavez, which is the alias he used while living in Houston. He has served roughly 19 months of a 9-year sentence for drug possession and distribution when he broke out. His identity was confirmed through fingerprints. Obits are sometimes used as vehicles of confession. In 2012, Val Patterson, a Utah scientist, penned his own obituary where he admitted that he didn't graduate from college and was not a recipient of a PhD. The diploma had been mailed to him by error. The University of Utah said they only had records of where he attended only 2 semesters in 1971 and 1972. Patterson was a chemist who owned Salt Lake Metals. He also confessed to stealing a safe from the Motor View Drive-In in 1971. For some reason, he had been banned for life from Disneyland and San Diego's SeaWorld, and he mentioned they could throw the ban away. He had also rolled rocks into Old Faithful, which interfered with the geyser. He died at age 59 from throat cancer. You know what? I don't agree with any of those obituaries being removed. I think that infringes on our free speech. And you know what? It's like, again, we get back to this thing that you think people, when they grow older, you see, oh, that poor old man or that poor old woman, kind of feel sorry for them. And they might have been, it might still be real jerks, and I'm putting that nicely. I think children, especially if they suffered in any way, shape, or form, should be allowed to put those things up. It is, but yeah, I don't agree with that type of censorship. Not at all. And you know what? If anything, especially close family members or people that normally you would think are going to contribute to an obituary, are the ones that knew these people best. Best. And what's that thing? Just because you're dying or dead or passed on does not make you a saint. It's like, and I understand, I can think of that all these, whoever's left behind, whether it's a wife or children, whoever, it's kind of maybe, knowing these people or having suffered whatever, some type of life with them or whatever, maybe as, like I said, as they grow older, they see that people think of them a certain way, not really knowing what's behind it. All right. And hey, let them have it. Let them have it. And newspapers should not stop you. It's like, hey, if that person is family, both barrels, baby, both barrels. And the same thing. If somebody's good and they have family, whatever, you write good things. But yeah, that kind of deal. Anyway, next story. You can tell I'm a little bit anti-censorship. Anyway, next story is titled "The Corpse Smuggler." This is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. In 2018, at the Chopper railway station in India, a man was arrested under suspicion of smuggling skeletal human remains. Instead of being a one-off, it seems corpse smuggling is quite common. Question is, who wants them and what for? In his luggage, he had 16 human skulls and 34 skeletons. He was thought to be part of a larger corpse smuggling ring that was taking the bones to China. Sanjay Prasad was arrested, and it was discovered he worked with a gang who supplied the skeletons to tantric and occultists in the Himalayan kingdom. There is also a high demand fueled by medical students in China. Not all are destined for medical use. Tibias are turned into flutes and sold to Tibetan Buddhists. Prayer bowls are cut from the crown of skulls. What Prasad wouldn't admit to is where he procured the skeletons from. It's believed the grave robbing took place in Christian or Muslim cemeteries, since Hindus cremate their dead. However, it has not been ruled out that morgue or crematorium attendants were bribed to turn over the skeletons to the gang. Authorities were investigating liquor smuggling in the area and stopped Prasad after he acted suspiciously, never guessing what he was carrying in his bags. He had foreign currency, indicating the tentacles regarding this dark trade extends into several countries. His intended destination was the border. This horrid smuggling has been going on for some years. In 2004, 1,000 human skulls and parts of human carcasses were captured in the same area. In 2009, a smuggler was arrested in Bihar, where more than 67 human skulls were seized. The process of producing the final product ready for export from India involves the following, quote, "First, the corpses were wrapped in netting and anchored in the river where bacteria and fish reduced the body to a loose pile of bones and mush in a week or so. The crew then scrubbed the bones and boiled them in a cauldron of water and caustic soda to dissolve any remaining flesh. That left the calcium surface with a yellow tint. To bring them up to medical white, bones were then left in sunlight for a week before being soaked in hydrochloric acid. End quote. In 2017, 8 men were arrested after they were found with 365 bones. It's believed they were taken from decomposing bodies found in the nearby rivers of Burdwan district, India. They were cleaned with hydrogen peroxide, and the buyers were allegedly doctors and medical colleges. In 1985, the Indian government outlawed the export of human remains, a practice which had been in existence for over 100 years. That same year, 1,500 child skeletons were found in the possession of a bone trader. Since they are rare and used to exemplify stages of osteological development, they command a higher price. The Indian media claimed that children were kidnapped and killed for their skeletons. The ban forced companies to manufacture plastic skeletons and spurred the trade of real bones through the black market. In the red market, on the trail of the world's organ brokers, author Scott Carney describes where prior to the ban, India was the leading source of human skeletons bound for medical colleges and laboratories across the world. It remains so even after the ban. The epicenter of the black market for skeletons is West Bengal. Present day obtaining a human skeleton legally in India is via hospitals who use unclaimed corpses. The smugglers have used forged documents to obtain the remains. Throughout the years, the Indian authorities have arrested individuals smuggling human skulls and skeletons, but this seems to have little effect since the export has remained in operation and as lucrative as ever. In 2023, the manager of the Harvard University morgue was arrested along with his wife for selling body parts from cadavers donated to the medical school, which were supposed to be cremated. I had never been aware that India was the leading source, and had been for so many years, of bones for anatomical. But let me tell you that I never knew that the Buddhists had prayer bowls cut from crowns of skulls. It's like all of a sudden I'm thinking of the Buddha like, and it's like, I don't know about that. I don't know. I just don't know about that. Okay, then off to our next story. This is out of the travel, and it's titled, "Don't Swim in This Haunted Yosemite Lake If You Hear Crying." Yosemite National Park is known for having some of the most difficult hikes in California, albeit beautiful ones. One challenging hike in particular takes hikers to a small alpine lake that highlights the dark side of Yosemite with a tale that has been told for centuries. If the lore is to be believed, visitors may want you to make sure not to swim in the lake if they hear crying. There have been stories of spirits that haunt Yosemite since before it was a national park. But that is part of Yosemite's draw. With visitors choosing to make reservation for Yosemite's most haunted hotel during their stay, or even exploring areas that are known to have supernatural activity in the park, there is an interest in things that cannot be explained. This is why so many make the hike to Grouse Lake to see if the lake is as haunted as the stories that surround it make it out to be. Before Yosemite National Park was part of the national park system, it was land that several Native American tribes lived in and around. It is one of the children of the Ahwahnee tribe that the story of Grouse Lake centers on, and it is not only sad but chilling. Yosemite named its first park ranger Galen Clark in 1867. 10 years before he took his position, though, Clark, who enjoyed hiking through Yosemite, decided to take a hike off the beaten path. The path would eventually take Clark out to Grouse Lake. The hike to Grouse Lake is a strenuous one. This is because it follows the Chilnalna Falls trail until it veers off nearly 5 miles after starting at the trailhead. After following a faint trail that many never see, Grouse Lake comes into view. It is at Grouse Lake where Clark decided to take a rest after his hike. On the opposite side of the lake from where Clark was, there was a band of Ahwahnee who had just finished up a deer hunt. They were getting water but were not swimming in the water. When the group was leaving, Clark heard a distant sound that he attributed to a wailing puppy that the Ahwahnee left behind. Later on that evening, Clark joined the same group he had seen at the lake at camp. Clark asked them about the crying and whether they were missing a puppy. But much to Clark's surprise, the Awani told him that the crying was not that of a puppy. Instead, it was the cries of a boy who was drowned in Grouse Lake. According to legend, the boy cries to lure others into the lake. Then, when they have waded into the lake, the boy grabs people by the feet and drags them into the lake where they drown. While there are not any statistics on how many people have drowned at Grouse Lake, the story may just be enough to make those who visit Yosemite want to swim elsewhere. And this is another portion that talks about the Chilnwalna, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Falls Trail leading to Grouse Lake is the scariest hiking trail in the U.S. What is interesting about Grouse Lake is that the hike to get out to it requires hikers to take Chilnwalna Falls Trail. The trail is one of the best kept secrets in Yosemite National Park because it is outside of the area where visitors usually venture, as it is closer to Wawona than it is Yosemite Valley. But with its 3 separate waterfalls that can be seen along the hike, it is stunning. However, it has also been named the scariest hiking trail in the U.S. The designation comes from the fact that not only does Chilnwalna Falls Trail lead to a waterfall that spills into Grouse Lake, but that many have felt unsettled on the trail en route to the lake. Whether this uneasy feeling comes from not knowing that the destination of Grouse Lake could come with the consequences of hearing the boy scream from the lake, or if spirits are with hikers along the trail, is unknown. However, just like Bridal Veil Falls, the falls at Chilnwalna are considered to be cursed, which is another factor as to why hikers may feel unrest while on Chilnwalna Falls Trail. Okay, Chilnwalna Falls is also considered to be haunted. Let's find out why. One of the most famous waterfalls worth chasing in Yosemite is Bridal Veil Falls. It is here that the Pohono spirit is said to live, luring people to the mist only so that they will be captured by the falls and never be seen again, adding to the number of missing people Yosemite has reported. According to a Wani legend, it is not until another person is tempted by the Pohono spirit that the previous person whose fate was the falls will have their spirit released. It turns into a vicious cycle of people needing to be drawn to the falls to allow others into the afterlife. There are some who claim Pohono or Evil Wind is in all the waterfalls in Yosemite. If Pohono is in Chilnwalna Falls, luring people to peer over the falls to only then find their fate in Grouse Lake, it adds an even scarier layer to the tale that already makes hair stand on end when traveling on Chilnwalna Falls Trail, regardless of whether Grouse Lake is your intended destination or not. So there you go. Everything is haunted there. The falls, the trail, the lake. Sounds like a plan to me. Yep. Okay, next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Fate of the Gravedigger. Criminals are sometimes undone by their stupidity or desperation, but there are others who are discovered by sheer bad luck. Such is the case of a gravedigger named Jean-Baptiste. This is Utah, 1862. 4 men were arrested and 2 were sought in an assault upon John W. Dawson, the governor of Utah, who had been nominated to the post by Abraham Lincoln. One of these men was named Moroni Clausen. Ironically, 3 weeks before, they had been hired to protect the governor until he reached the eastern boundary of the Utah Territory. But then something changed. It all started in the last days of December in 1861, when Dawson had been confined to his house, reported by his physician to be suffering some form of mental derangement. At first, the populace didn't believe the diagnosis, but eventually it came to light as being accurate. Questions were raised whether his insanity where his insanity stemmed from. Some believed it was hereditary, while others believed it was his journey across the plains and incidents thereof had affected his brain. Others went as far as to believe the high altitude in Utah had affected Dawson, who hailed from Indiana. The one rumor that was whispered, but had a ring of truth, pertained to a story where he had made criminal approaches to Mormon widow Albina Merrill Williams, who responded by thrashing him with a fire shovel. Was this a verbal exchange with Mrs. Williams, or something worse? The answer remains unknown. Whatever the cause, he decided to leave. and hired some men to accompany him as he headed out to take a stage headed for the east. Dr. Chambers, his personal physician, accompanied the governor on the trip. As soon as Dawson had left, awful disclosures known were made known to the Mormons about the incident, and that he had tried to pay her hush money. Then it was believed the real reason Dawson fled was that she had relatives in the territory, and they were coming to seek retribution. This was why he suddenly became sick and crazy. Dawson's appointment came fresh after the Latter-day Saints had a series of disagreements with the United States government known as the Utah War of 1857-58, which could explain why the incident escalated to such a degree. The Dawson party had reached Mountain Dell at Ephraim Hanks' Pony Express station, where they waited for the coach. This is when Dawson's guards turned on him and robbed him of his goods and beat him savagely, allegedly removing one of his testicles. Orrin Porter Rockwell, one of Sheriff Burton's deputies, organized a posse and set out after the men. They followed them out west to the California mail route. They arrived at Foss Station and 2 were apprehended and 1 shot. They were arrested and taken to Fort Crittenden, where the posse stopped to rest. This is where Clausen and Smith tried to escape and were shot dead. Those apprehended later claimed they were acting under direct orders of the Salt Lake police chief. Maroney Clausen already had a history of run-ins with the law, when a true bill was found against him for larceny, mostly for cattle rustling, in 1860. Clausen was buried in the city cemetery at the city's expense. A few days after the burial, Clausen's brother obtained permission to disinter the body and move it to Draperville, where the Clausen family lived. The coffin was opened and the body was found to be nude and lying on its face. Maroney's brother was enraged, thinking it had purposely been buried this way. However, it was verified that he was dressed when he went into the ground. Suspicion fell upon the gravedigger named Jean-Baptiste. The police searched his home and found large quantities of burial clothes. The sexton went on to admit he had been stealing from the dead for about 9 years, 3 of which had been at this current cemetery. The recovered garments were laid out in the main hall of the courthouse to be inspected by people in the community to see if they recognized their loved ones' belongings. Even though the weather in March was cold, the crowds poured into the cemetery. Jean-Baptiste was described as a man of blunted sensibilities, and that when arrested, he was wearing 2 shirts which had been stripped from the dead and still had the sickening scent peculiar to the grave. Prior to his arrival in Utah, Jean-Baptiste was said to be a Frenchman who had lived in England and Australia until he sailed to San Francisco. He had only been living in Salt Lake City for 4 or 5 years, most of the time working as a sexton at Salt Lake's City Cemetery. It was estimated he robbed about 300 graves and used the caskets for firewood. Besides robbing the dead, he was accused of robbing the city treasury by charging $5 for Clausen's clothes, but burying him nude. Sadly, one of the officers that arrested Jean-Baptiste found the garments of his own child among those that were laid out for identification. Many were calling for the lynch code, but there was a suspicion that Jean-Baptiste was a bit feeble-minded, as was his wife. LDS President Brigham Young made an announcement in answer to the public's unrest, since there was great outrage among the Mormon populace. The clothes that were unclaimed were buried in a mass grave at the cemetery. It was said that to bolster a small income, Jean-Baptiste would sell the clothing he robbed to the few Jewish second-hand clothing dealers. The shrouds were sold to a window blind factory where they were made into blinds. Prior to the discovery of his grave robbing, he was known to scavenge through trash and was always searching the slums for barrels, boxes, and cast-off garments. Another story was that Jean-Baptiste was seen wearing a suit of broadcloth that resembled one that a murdered saloon keeper was buried in. Another account about Jean-Baptiste's activities is that he robbed the grave of a man hanged in Utah and wore his boots to a dance. These stories are unverified and sound more like character assassination than the truth. With the threat of a lynching hanging over his head, authorities had to keep Baptiste alone in the jail to make sure he stayed safe. But what to do with a man who hadn't killed anyone but caused great heartache among the people? The story told was that he was banished first to Antelope Island in the Great Salt Lake, but since the waters were so shallow, he was taken instead to Fremont Island or Church Island, where they left him. The place had trees and vegetation and was used as herding ground for cattle belonging to the Mormon Church. It was rumored his ears were cut off and he was branded on the forehead, robbing the dead. Also that a ball and chain were tied to him so he couldn't leave the island. Others disputed he was never chained, and the message on his forehead was done in indelible ink. It was put out that 3 weeks after being marooned, authorities returned to find that Baptiste had used the roof and sides of the cabin built for him. He had torn them off and made thongs from the cowhide of a heifer that was found dead nearby. With these items, he built a raft and left the island. Supposedly, he headed to a mining camp in California or Montana and ended his days there. Around 1890, hunters found a skull at the mouth of the River Jordan where it empties into the lake. A search was made for the rest of the skeleton, but it was not found. In 1893, a story was published in a local newspaper that John Weingar, a muskrat hunter, found the skeleton in the same area that consisted of the arms, legs, ribs, and vertebrae. It was missing a head. Around the leg bone was an iron clamp, and an iron ball was attached to it. Was this the remains of the marooned Jean-Baptiste, who it seemed died of hunger and exposure? However, officers who were present when Jean-Baptiste was taken to the island affirmed that he was never shackled with a ball and chain, making it questionable if the remains were Jean-Baptiste, or if the story is true at all. In truth, the ultimate fate of Jean-Baptiste is shrouded in mystery. Was he stranded on the island and escaped after 3 weeks? Or did he live in a cave on the island for years, feeding off the cattle wildlife and also cannibalizing any humans that wrecked there? The island developed a reputation for being haunted and was avoided by the Indians and the Mormons. However, there is a darker story as to the fate of the gravedigger, and it is this. He was taken to Antelope Island and shot, an execution that could not be done publicly. Then the story was put out of his flight from the island by using the materials from the cabin and the leather thongs, so that no further search would be made for him, which means Jean-Baptiste's bones are still lying somewhere on an island in the Great Salt Lake. Because remember, Jean-Baptiste, yeah, he caused heartache, but he didn't kill anybody. Everybody was dead. All he did was take their belongings, but so killing him, in other words, public execution, by law it couldn't be done. But in other words, even if they took it, prosecuted him in court, they couldn't do anything to him. So, but can you imagine the outrage in the community? That's why they got rid of Jean-Baptiste. And I think that last explanation is the one that holds the most water. Well, anyway, until next time, I will be back soon with more eerie news. Take care.